Hey everybody, welcome back to NikkiT.live. I'm your host Nick Taylor, and today I didn't ask how to pronounce your name, but is it Theo Ephraim? Is that correct?
Ephraim.
Ephraim.
But anyway, it's
Okay,
fine.
cool. Yeah, Theo Ephraim and Phil Miller. How both of you doing today?
Very
Great.
good. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Yeah, no, been looking forward to chatting. So, uh, before we kind of get into things, I know people always kind of like to know how people kind of got into tech. I don't know if either of you want to give like a 1 minute or whatever of like what brought you to tech or even to Domino that we're going to talk about in Varlock. But
You go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I mean I guess the 1 minute version. My uncle studied computer science back in the day and gave me his old computer, and
oh,
I
okay,
started tinkering with that when I was 7 or 8 years old or something. And
nice.
then studied computer engineering, mathematical science, that kind of thing, and was always kind of like a freelance web dev person even before that.
Okay,
And kind of made my way through the corporate world and the startup world, lots of engineering management, lots of building front end teams. And then I guess the most recent thing was doing some DevRel. And then when Theo came knocking, the opportunity was there. So,
nice.
yada, yada. That's why we're here.
Cool. And what about yourself, Theo?
Yeah, I've been coding since I was a kid as well. Got into like a magnet program when I was a kid, making like a hypercard and Visual Basic and all that when I
Okay,
was quite young. So I've been coding since I was really quite young, and had an amazing teacher in high school. He was like a MIT prof that was somehow ended up at my high school, and he would be like
okay.
name dropping the creators of languages and stuff, and we're all like, we don't know who those people are, but he was like clearly around at the beginning of this stuff. And yeah, just had an amazing teacher. And so studied computer science in school, was never really went to class, was always just coding, building websites since
Yeah,
high school. And yeah, did my own startup thing a couple times, worked for a bunch of different early startups. And yeah, we can get into a little bit more of that when we talk about how Domino started. But yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, thanks for that, man. Yeah, so we're talking about Varlock today, but if we go back a bit first, so yeah, let's talk about Domino. I guess how did Domino come about, and also uh what do you do at Domino? Like Varlock is something we're going to talk about, but Domino in general, because I think Varlock's something a little newer. I guess what's the beginnings of the company, or what were like the problems you were trying to solve for people in the industry?
Yeah, I can kind of give a background of how we got here. So interestingly, it kind of started. Well, I've always been kind of the person on the team, setting up a lot of the dev tools and setting up systems for
Okay.
everybody, making sure everyone's like, sorted. And I've
Yeah.
built, some open source stuff before, but never really threw myself in like full time to dev tools and open source. But I was working for a company called Clay, which they're having a moment right now. It's sort of a go-to-market sales automation tool. Um,
Okay.
but one of the things I was exploring there was sort of this idea that um, what if all the data that you have is kind of more strongly typed, and so in that setting, it's like it's kind of like a spreadsheet, and like there's a column for email, there's a column for name, there's a column for company, like whatever, and the spreadsheet kind of
Okay.
fills itself with automation. But what's interesting is you're like, okay, what if the email column is like, we can set the type to be email? That means that there's validation for it. We know
Hmm.
semantically kind of what that means, right? Now, when you fill in the email, we're going to go and, call well, let's say we extract the domain name from it, right? So that's like a simple
Okay.
function, grab the domain. Again, we know it's a domain name, so we can run some validation on it, right? And then we can feed that into something else that needs a domain name. So say you
Yeah.
feed that into some, Lambda that goes and whatever, scrapes the internet, looks for something, pulls some data back. So you end up with this kind of reactive graph of data, right? Where every bit of data has sort of a type, and not just like a TypeScript type, but like,
Hmm.
how can I validate it? What does this actually mean? Are there documentation links that go along with it? And just more semantically, like, what is this thing? Like, A first name is a
Yeah.
good example of one that there isn't necessarily validation for it, but once I know that this is a first name, that's interesting. I can do something with it.
Yeah. No, totally.
So after Clay, I ended up working at a company called System Initiative, which interestingly is doing kind of the same thing except for infrastructure. So
Okay.
how do we configure our infrastructure, right? So rather than doing it in like a big YAML-y kind of file, like what if we know that, oh, this is a bit, all of this data needs to then get fed in and assembled into a thing. And again, it's just this big reactive graph of data,
Yeah.
um, and functions, right? And when what System Initiative is doing is really cool, but it's really geared towards like DevOps power users, DevOps teams.
Okay.
And I have historically not really been a DevOps guy. I've been sort of more of a full stack product kind of guy, and
Okay.
so I really like those ideas, but said, what if I apply some of those ideas to something that's a little bit more, full stack friendly, like just geared towards more developers in general as opposed to DevOps developers. Um, and that was sort of the genesis of Domino. So what we're trying to do is, how do you configure, run, and deploy applications in a way that kind of feels a bit magical, a bit less. It's not that there's not coding involved and it's not declarative, but when you apply this sort of like reactive graph of data where everything gets validated, and if you know what the types are, you can sort of say, oh, I need a domain name. I only have one domain name in the graph. I can probably just wire that up automatically.
Okay.
Really interesting things kind of happen.
Yeah. Can you tell Theo's a big Vue fan too? If you can't tell.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
another way of thinking about it is like, what if we take some of those principles of Vue, reactivity, the provide, inject sort of dependency injection stuff? What if we apply that to configuration rather than front end development?
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. You're a Vue fan. I still love React, but I've hung out with Daniel Rowe before, and Nuxt and all that. It makes for a compelling case. So and there's definitely room for a bunch of frameworks. So, um, no, that's cool. So, okay, so that's kind of what Domino is like the product currently.
So that was kind of like the ethos behind, where we started last year. And
Okay.
Domino, the library, I know now we're getting confusing, Domino Inc. put out Domino, the library, the set of
Yeah.
libraries, really. And that was our first attempt at solving this problem, right? So, taking those principles Theo talked about, you write like a big schema in TypeScript, and you can, attach functions and documentation links, and we do all kinds of magical stuff with integrations and leak detection and log redaction and all that
Okay.
because we have the semantics around your configuration.
Okay.
We're happy to go a bit deeper on that if you want, but TLDR, varlock is kind of like the next incarnation of that, building on all the stuff we learned there and bringing a lot of that with us with a little bit of a
Okay.
simpler mentality.
Gotcha. So, like in terms, I know, I think Theo might share some stuff later on his screen, but so like me as an app dev, like say I have like a Next.js app or whatever, this is something that I plug into kind of like my like because you said it's not really for DevOps, so this is not something that's in the CI/CD pipeline then, or like where does this fit exactly?
Oh, it totally is. It's just like what I mean by it's not DevOps is that it's not like, it's not a tool that's only for DevOps hardcore professionals, right? It's a tool that's made for all developers, and it's meant to be used from the beginning, even if you're just starting out and it's a simple project. It's like it still makes sense to use it. Whereas,
Okay.
some of these tools only make sense once you reach a certain scale or a certain level of complexity.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
the idea is, in Next, for example, they already have some automatic loading of .env files, right? So you might have a .env file, you might have a .env.example file. That's very, very common, right? Um,
Yeah.
we can get into like a little bit of sort of the problem, like some of the common problems here. So like, you have a .env.example file. it gets out of sync constantly, right? So somebody adds a new thing,
Yeah.
they forget to add it to the example, or they add it to the example, but now everyone on the team needs that new API key. Maybe it's not the prod key, but it's still a little sensitive, so you have to pass it around somehow, right? So what
Okay.
happens is like that file's constantly out of sync. And every time you add a new thing, it's like suddenly, I remember many times in the office, it's like I like suddenly my thing's breaking. I look around, everyone's kind of like standing up and wandering around, getting kind of confused and lost because it's like they all got distracted because they didn't have the API key, and now nothing. Their run dev doesn't work anymore, and so you're kind of
Yeah.
scrambling, figuring it out, right? Um, the other thing is like you might have this example file, but like, do you have validation, right? So that when something is missing, you don't just get some weird crash or crash when you hit the one API route that uses it, but you actually get some kind of startup message that says, hey, this thing's missing. Setting that up
Okay.
is something that you have to do manually. You have to pick which library you want to do, wire it up. It's often either a lot of custom code or custom kind of glue code. Um,
Okay.
then do you have types, right? So if you have type safety, some of the validation libraries might give you types. Other times people are writing them by hand. So you now potentially have, many sources of truth, right? The what is the config, what's required, like that validation, if it's custom, could be scattered all through your code base. Like
If you're in a monorepo, it could be in several places, right?
yeah, if you're in a monorepo, there's no easy way to share config across multiple services. Uh, Often also like in a monorepo, Next has its own built-in config stuff.
Yeah.
Your API might have a different config setup. So even in the same project, you might have like 4 or 5 different kind of configuration libraries and setups being used, all of which are often kind of home built, kind of wired together, all just fine. You kind of get it
Yeah.
working and you move on. And it may not be the biggest problem you're dealing with every day, but it comes up regularly. Every time you onboard a team member, every time
Yeah.
you add a new key, every time you're, maybe you're playing with a new CI system or a new deployment system, and okay, now I have to go in and set all these variables. Like you have to rotate a
Yeah.
key. Where are they all set? Right? Like it's not every day that you're dealing with this, but it's like it's very common. It's regular. It happens all the time, and it just wastes our time. Like, why do I
Yeah.
have to reinvent the wheel?
I regularly do git clean in my repos every now and then. Like, this is a side note, but like sometimes when like things are just not working in my repo, 99% of the time, if I do a literal git clean, things start working again. But when you do that, I end up nuking my .env file all the time, and then I'm like, oh, gotta go rotate my OpenAI key or whatever because I don't know what it is anymore and stuff.
Yeah.
And like, obviously, you can store it in other places. But so I guess in terms of this, so s- obviously if you've got like API keys in there, this is like secure by default. But is this something that like say I'm a dev on the team? Do I pull down like the repo and then there's like a mini package that bootstraps it? The
So
config, and is the config in the repo or where does it come from?
so
Kind of.
there's a couple different things going on here, but the first thing is like let's, instead of an env example file, which is this kind of one-time use copy paste, often getting out of
Mhm.
sync thing, right? We want to provide you with something that is going to always stay in sync and actually involved in the loading process. So
Okay.
we have introduced this thing called the .env.schema file, and it's like an example file, except it includes, it can include values if they're not sensitive. It can
Mhm.
include, we introduced this idea, we call this DSL env spec, and it's basically using decorator style comments to add extra metadata. So
Okay.
this thing's required. This thing's a port number. This thing is a URL. This thing, here's a description of what's going on. This thing is an enum. It could be one of these 3 values. And for any of them that are not sensitive, you can set the values. Um, we know which ones are sensitive and which ones aren't, so we can handle
Mhm.
them appropriately. Um, and so now that you no longer have this one-time use copy paste thing, it's a schema that's actually involved in the loading, and it inherently is going to always be up to date. Now, in terms of getting sensitive values into the system, you can
Yeah.
either set them, as actual environment variables. Like on production, you might, still use whatever Next.js's or Vercel's UI to set something, right?
Okay, yeah,
You
yeah.
can use env.local files, so you can have ignored files that contain things. Or we've introduced, aside from the comments, the other thing we've introduced is a new function call syntax. So
Okay.
basically, you could say, you could declaratively describe how this thing is going to be filled, like go fetch it from 1Password or go fetch it from AWS in this, in this item in Secrets Manager or whatever.
Okay.
So you could see how it's going to be filled from the committed code without necessarily, exposing it. And even if you as the developer
Okay.
don't even have access to the prod credentials, it's really useful to be able to understand, oh, this is how they're going to be filled, rather than just hoping that in
Hmm.
production somebody filled it in a UI somewhere that you don't have access to.
And it means
Okay.
you could validate the configuration of that environment in a secure CI/CD pipeline, right? So if you have those production
Okay.
keys there, you can validate it before it goes to
Okay,
production.
you can like do like a dry run to say, hey, oh, you forgot this API key or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could imagine like
Okay.
this branch, I made changes to my schema or to the config in general. And on GitHub, one of the steps is validate that if this was production and the schema was being resolved, that everything would go okay.
Okay.
And and if something goes wrong, it's not just like weird runtime crash stack trace. It's like this thing's supposed to be an integer, that's less than 100, and you set it to 100
Yeah.
bug.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And okay, I think it kind of answers my question because like I was like, well, I didn't ask the question yet, but it was like I get like you non-sensitive stuff, it doesn't really matter, but the sensitive stuff, because like people, like you always hear stuff like don't put your keys in Git for obvious reasons.
Mhm.
So is the recommended approach when you're using this to, because you're mentioning the function calling, so where it's literally only pulling them in at runtime, so like in terms of like me pulling down whatever the config is with the schema, like it's not like I'm in danger of like opening the keys to the kingdom for the company because they're not even run at that point, or is that kind of how it works, or
Yeah, I mean, it would be the same as you as setting them, like let's say you fill them in from whatever, from Vercel's UI or Heroku or whatever, right? You're using your platform's kind of UI to inject environment variables. It's in that
yeah.
case, it's no different. You're just having an extra validation and coercion step that kind of
Okay.
runs at the beginning. In the case where it's going to be pulling from some external source, I mean, there's going to be some API key or some kind of credential that's needed to go and fetch those things. So that
Hmm.
one you might have to inject. But it's there's no danger there. Um, one thing that we haven't rolled out yet, but we're working on is sort of encrypted shared vaults. So in
Okay.
that case, you might actually commit the encrypted secret in Git. And
Okay.
there's a bunch of tools that do this already. Some people love it, some people hate it. There's trade-offs there, right? Now you have this sort of branching, merging mechanism to like, it's not confusing anymore. How am I gonna test this on this branch and then have it merge to production when I actually merge it? It's just part of Git, right?
Yeah.
The downside is when you want to change something, you have to go through CI and go through that whole workflow, which could take a little bit longer.
Yeah. But I guess at the same time, in terms of like auditability, am I saying that right? I can't speak today.
Auditability, yeah.
Like a PR went up to say we're updating this credential. So like
Yeah.
it's not like somebody go like, why is the credential different now? Like if you
Yeah. There's a lot of
yeah. And
benefits to doing it that way. I think really the downside is that some places CI is very slow, right?
okay. Yeah.
Or
Ideally,
if
it's not.
that key leaks, you probably have to rotate everything in that encrypted vault potentially, like
That's
depending on how
Yeah.
you
No,
segment the
well,
vaults.
yeah, I was gonna ask, like there's obviously, like very security minded people might be like, I'm not doing this, but like it's like to your point, you were saying there's trade-offs. but yeah, like I guess like to Phil's point, if the key like came out, you would obviously have to rotate it.
Well,
But it's
the goal
yeah.
is that this system should be flexible enough that it can handle all these different ways of doing things, right? So if you want to have a single shared encryption key that then encrypts everything, sure. If
Mhm.
you want to pull everything from AWS, using your personal like access keys and different access keys per deployed environment, sure. Like
Yeah.
this, we're just trying to be kind of the a sensible system to glue all this stuff together without you having to
Okay.
write all this custom code. Um,
Yeah. No, that makes sense in the sense that like me as the dev, I don't need to care that it's pulling keys from AWS or here. It just at runtime I just know it injects them and then you're good to go. So okay, cool. So what we're talking about now there is that what Domino is and Varlock's and the next level, or is this what Varlock is at the moment? Or I don't know.
I
I'm
mean,
just smiling
bit
because
of
you're both
both.
smiling.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of our conundrum, right? Like, I mean, Domino does a lot of the stuff we just described, except it doesn't have this M spec DSL. Like, it's all
Okay.
written in TypeScript. The DSL is a sort of our new thing to meet people where they are in the .env files they're already using, because we
Okay.
found that there was a bit of a learning curve, and people kind of fall off in onboarding if they have to write a bunch of TypeScript, especially
Okay. Yeah.
if they're not in that sort of ECMAScript world, right?
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I
Yeah.
think like Domino really does a lot of this same stuff. But the problem is like when you run in it, there's a new folder, there's a new TS config file, there's your new schema, there's like a whole bunch of stuff, and it's all
Okay.
new, and there's a lot of dependencies, and it just felt very heavy. Whereas
Okay.
with Varlock, because you're just adding these comments in an end file, if you want to just try it out, like you can
Hmm.
add one comment that says at required above an item, load
Okay.
it via Varlock, and you're already doing it, right? So it just feels a lot lighter, a lot simpler. I think people can
Okay.
kind of grok it just immediately. They see an end example, like a schema file with a couple
Hmm.
decorators, they immediately know what it's going to do. Like
Yeah.
it's intuitive, right?
And people are
Yeah.
we're already doing this, right? But just not getting value out of those comments, and there is no standardization in the
Y-
comments.
Yeah, that's true. And it's yeah, the validation isn't like obviously validation isn't a new concept, but putting it together with this it sounds like it is. I don't know if you kind of wanted to maybe show a bit of it, Theo,
Sure.
in action.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to.
Just cool. All right. And
Let's try this out.
yeah, let me just I'll get your URL for your screen. Just one sec here. Oh, you're down there. Okay, cool. All right, let's just switch over to here. Let me just copy your link. Here we go. Oh, it's already sharing.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So yeah, it's on the screen.
Yeah.
All right.
Do
So
you
here's
mind bumping it just one more, the
sure.
font? Cool.
How's that?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so here's an example of a env schema file. And yes, there's a couple new things, but it shouldn't look that different than an env example file, right? Your example file, you might have just a bunch of items, some comments above them, some values that are actually, default values meant to be used. Often there's a
Mhm.
bunch of values that are sort of like replace me for production, like, a bunch of placeholders. So
Yeah.
that's kind of one problem that's annoying, is you don't know which ones are meant to be used or not. Here, we
Mhm.
obviously don't have that problem. So you can see that at the top here, we call this a header. Um, so it's a comment block that ends with a divider. And you
Okay.
can see that there's some decorators here. And now these decorators in the header we call root decorators, and they sort of affect the entire loading process, or they could affect all of the items. So like I'm going to set a default sensitive value for all of them. I can say, hey, they're default sensitive. I can do default required. I can
Okay.
enable and disable type generation. And then the other thing you'll see here is this env flag. And what that is I'm saying which item in the schema is my environment flag. And that
Okay.
environment flag is going to be responsible for triggering the automatic loading of, you know, .env.development, .env.production, whatever.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
In, you know, in other systems, it'll be sort of a hard coded, you know, it cares only about node.env or something like that, right? Here you can
Okay.
explicitly say, I want to create my own, or, you know, where it is. And there's good
Okay.
reasons for using a different thing than node.env, aside from, you know, it being cross kind of language.
Yeah.
And then you can see on each item, we can have these more, you know, more decorators. The comments that are directly above the item get attached. So if I add a blank line, that's not attached anymore. If I add a divider, that's not attached anymore. But if it's directly above, it is attached, and it doesn't matter. I can have more comments, more decorators. Everything that's
Okay.
directly above gets attached. So
Okay, and you can obviously have multiple decorators, like at required,
yep.
at something. Yeah.
So
Okay.
here's like, you know, our environment flag. This triggers loading of .env files, right? And then so I can give it a type. There's a bunch of, you know, different types. There's this enum is enum. You can do number, string,
Okay.
port, and on a lot of them there's helpers. So let's say I can go like type equals string starts with, you know, AB underscore. So there's a whole bunch of helpers so that you don't have to, you can do most of the validation you need, you know, without having
Okay.
to write any custom code. What else? So yeah, I can say, you know, I can say if it's required, I can say if it's sensitive, I can give an example if that's useful. Sometimes it could be, but
Okay.
you know, no longer is the example in as a fake value, right? It's moved out and clearly an example.
Okay.
And that will show up in the IntelliSense when you ultimately use it in your application too.
So let's
Okay, yeah,
go
I was gonna ask you
run
about
that.
because it's pulled in as a TypeScript library. That's why you're talking about
So
you
yeah,
get the IntelliSense.
I'll show you how it works. It's pretty
Okay.
interesting actually. So first of all, we can just run this load command. We can see, you know, everything's passing. We can see the values. Anything that's sensitive is going to be redacted.
Okay.
If you want, I'll get rid of this item because it's required. So this should trigger an error. You know, we get a clear error message. Hey, this item is required, but it's empty, right?
Okay.
We could do things like, let's do, you know, type equals number, max equals 100, 101, you know, max
Okay.
value 100, right? So immediately you're just getting all the validation you need with no custom code. This isn't even coupled to TypeScript at all, right? This, you could use this with
Yeah.
any programming language, which is just really nice, right? And I now have a single toolkit to use all the time.
Yeah.
What's cool
And
is
I guess to your sorry
oh,
to
go
your
ahead.
point about like you ran the load there and it failed. This is what you would do in your CI/CD pipeline before you even attempt to build or anything. You could just run varlock load or sorry a pm exec varlock load. If that check fails, obviously you just don't even go any further, and then you potentially save build minutes too, I guess, by doing that check early on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, so you can do this in CI, which is I've done it for us because it's just handy to have this as sort of a debugging mechanism in your logs when you're
Yeah.
trying to figure out what's going on. But usually it would also be built into the sort of build command. So if it's going to be loading
Okay.
in the build command and validation is failing, it's going to
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. If it's in the build. Yeah. Yeah.
but I do this. I do an explicit load, you know, just for the sake of having it in the logs because
Yeah.
it's really useful. So what's going on here is like it's parsing this file. We built our own sort of env parser that knows, you know, how to understand these comments and pulls out the values and everything. It understands links between everything. So something that's I'm not really showing here, but we could do like, you know, other or here. Why don't we do like db name equals, you know, my db and then db URL equals, you know, Postgres : whatever.
Nice autocomplete there. Yeah.
And then DB name, right? So we can reference other items in our item values. And internally what happens is it parses everything and then it builds this big graph. And so it actually understands all the dependencies through everything.
Okay.
It knows the order that it should, you know, resolve them in, even if you were pulling, you know, something say from 1Password or whatever, go resolve that first, then feed it into this function, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
And so it has this big tree of stuff and it has all the items. And if you turn on this generate types decorator, what it does is it actually spits out this type file. And
Okay.
these are plain types. There's nothing weird going on other than there's like embedded SVGs, but you can see what this is the kind of IntelliSense that you get with it. So it's really
Okay.
nice. You can put, you know, you can put links to documentation. You can put, you can actually set the icon to something different. Like you can see there's a little ABC,
Okay.
and there's, you know, there's a lot you can do there. And then you can basically, because that type file has been spat out, we let you access that in your code. So in my
Okay.
code, I import this, you know, env, and now I get that same IntelliSense with, you know, all the documentation. As much info as you put in your schema, you'll get more info in your IntelliSense.
Okay. And I guess like you had some examples where like I don't know, like maybe the key has to be like SB underscore and then like, you know, characters after it. I guess like when you generate the types, do you just use like a template string in the type for that? Like you say like S
Um,
or
we don't do that. I mean, I could. I don't think you'd really get much benefit out of it in your code. Like, you know, we do sort of translate it into the TypeScript types of, you know, enums or strings or
okay.
numbers or Boolean. But
Yeah.
the sort of string templating stuff, I don't think you'd really get much out of it. But you know, a common example is, you know, or sorry, this is like type equals string starts with, you know, PK.
Okay, so like a good enough check like that.
And yeah, I mean, the nice, you just, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you need that to translate all the way through the TypeScript types, but
Okay, gotcha.
one thing that's cool about this too is that, you know, right now we're generating types for TypeScript, and even though our library is all written in TypeScript, we could easily generate types for other languages, right? It's not
Yeah.
doing this like crazy TypeScript voodoo to extract the types, you know, like Zod and those kinds of things are doing, which is like amazing. I mean, don't get me wrong, but like the errors you get sometimes are really weird and confusing. You know, the types are just
Okay.
completely like nonsensical. So this way you just get a normal type that is not confusing at all.
Okay. So for this m.schema, I guess you parse it as a AST and like right now you just transform it as a DTS, but it could be like you said other languages or okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
we haven't implemented it yet, but we plan to do type generation for, you know, every language that could support it
Yeah.
where it would be
So
useful.
the door is open there to do that obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and this
No,
I don't
that's
think
super
Theo
cool.
mentioned it, but we have a standalone binary too, so you can, you know, do the similar stuff in whatever language or, you know, whatever build command you're already using.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely having the types on the env file. I mean, TypeScript in general, or types in general, I should say, are a good thing. You know, there was definitely, at least in the JavaScript ecosystem, a lot of pushback initially, but I think won't say everybody, but like I think a pretty solid majority are like in agreement. TypeScript is
Yeah.
kind
It's
of the
not
way
going
to
anywhere.
go if you're building anything that's not tiny,
Yeah. I
basically.
mean,
But
I'll admit it took me a while to come on board. And
Same.
it wasn't because it wasn't interesting. It was because the tooling wasn't good enough yet. It was like you have to
yeah,
introduce all of this new build tooling, and the build tooling wasn't as good. And you know, every time you pulled in an external library that didn't have types, you'd have to go and write the types for it. It was just like
yeah,
it
exactly. No,
wasn't
the
great.
ecosystem's way better now for sure.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, I think we can't underestimate how much VS Code has helped push that too, right? Just like having it
Yeah,
Oh
there
yeah.
in the IDE that everyone uses, right?
and Vite as well, right? Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, the pushback before for me was like, oh, like I don't have any build step right now for my Node API. Like, you know, I don't really
Mhm.
want to introduce all that tooling. But now, like, well, you don't even need it anymore with the latest strip type stuff. But like the
Yeah.
tooling is so much better and faster that it's not that much of a burden to have to add something.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and they just port. They're not finished the port, but the TypeScript compilers in Go now or will
Mhm.
be
Yeah.
done at some point, which is a whole interesting subject on its own. But But yeah.
Here, I want to show you a couple more just interesting things. So like, I've got this schema, I'm pulling it in, I can now use it in this is a Next app. So
Yeah.
let's actually boot it up. I have some kind of debugging stuff going on, but one thing that you'll see is that my secrets are redacted in the console. So we're actually patching global console methods, and we know which values need to be redacted, so we can redact them. Doesn't
Okay.
matter how they get logged, right? The other thing is here. Let's go to whatever. You can see I have an app. It is loading the stuff. Let's comment this out. So let's actually just shove the secret into the. Oh yeah, it worked. So I'm now rendering a secret into the page. So I'm leaking it, right? If I'm just refreshing that there, you can see that it detected the leak, right? So in production, this will actually stop the leak from happening. And
Okay.
in this kind of like Next and these other similar frameworks, like where you don't necessarily know, I'm writing my code, I don't know if it's running on the server or on the client, or how code is getting
Yeah.
bundled. Like, it is very possible to leak secrets and shoot yourself in the foot, and this just kind of protects you. It just makes sure you do the right thing. Doesn't matter if you mess up.
Yeah. And so I guess like kind of high level, it just knows like you're trying to render this on a page and it's sensitive, so it just lets you know. Is
So
that kind of
similar
the
to
flow?
how with console logs, we're like, we patch the log method. So as everything's going out, we just look for these strings and redact them. So what we
Okay.
do is we patch the like global server response and response methods. So like when you're actually returning a server response, it looks for the string and will throw an error if it catches it.
Okay.
We do the same with like
Okay.
the Webpack build stuff. So if we see it in any of the client facing files that got bundled, we'll stop you there as well.
Okay. So you scan the build artifacts before deploying then, or as
So
it
it
builds? Okay.
scans build artifacts after a build. Here we can.
Okay.
It scans the build artifacts after a build, and then also at runtime, it scans outgoing responses.
Okay. And when you mean the response, you mean like the literal like MDN response class?
Server
Yeah.
response. It depends.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of weird stuff with whether it's happening on Edge runtime or Node, and server
Yeah.
response,
Yeah. Yeah.
response, and
Yes,
all
I'm
this
sure
crazy
you're
stuff.
aware.
Yeah. I used to work on the frameworks team at Netlify, so I'm very
Yeah,
aware of
you
these.
But so here we can see I built, and it is scanning the static HTML files. It will scan the user-facing JavaScript files. So if anything get rendered that way, it'll stop you. But you still might have a server-rendered page that didn't go into, where something wasn't going to be injected into one of those built files. So we do it at
Okay.
runtime as well.
Okay. No, that's cool.
One more thing we didn't implement it yet in Varlock, but we had it in Domino, is scanning outgoing HTTP requests. So let's say you have your Stripe key, right? And basically we can say, okay, here's this key. It's only allowed to go to api.stripe.com. And so we scan all of the HTTP requests that are going out to other systems and make sure that any secrets we find are going to the right place. So a common reason that you'd mess it up is like, maybe your logging system, you're firing off some logs and you're including, request logs there, and you're accidentally sending your sensitive keys off
Oh,
to
okay.
service.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. And that's are you patching request, or is that like a middlware? You said you were patching.
That's patching request, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patching
Okay.
fetch and what's the other one? The older one.
Oh, XHR,
Yeah, exactly. We try to
XML
do the
HTTP
patching stuff
requests.
because it should just work, right? You shouldn't have to change your code to say, okay, now I have to like call this scan function every time I'm about to do this thing. It should just work all the time.
Okay. And I'm just more curious about implementation here, but are you using like proxies in at least in JavaScript land for like overriding those things, or
It depends on the thing. I mean, I've had to do a lot of weird experimentation and digging and like seeing what will work and what doesn't. For
okay,
the yeah, for console, let's see. I'm overriding the global methods for server response. I think I override the. I can't remember if I override the. No, I think it's response. I override the global response with a new subclass that sort of then uses the parent class. It's
okay,
all
okay.
like it's whatever works. It's I'll go through
Yeah, yeah.
whatever weird voodoo I have to make it happen.
Yeah, but the TLDR, user isn't aware of this. They're just doing stuff business as usual.
Yeah. So I'll show you like for next, like all we have to do to actually turn this on is, we write our schema.
And
Uh,
our init will help you write that the
yeah.
first time too.
Okay, cool, gotcha.
We're gonna go look at our package JSON. We do this like special override thing. There it's here, overrides. Um, yeah, we do this override to tell it to use our package instead of nextenv, which is the sort of built-in .env loader.
Okay,
And then in our next config, we add this plugin, and that's it. Everything else
okay,
just works. So it loads all the files, it injects the additional security features. You don't have to do anything.
And you can
okay,
continue to
cool.
use process.env or import.meta.env depending on your framework, but
Yeah.
Okay,
you
okay,
you
but
get the better
yeah,
IntelliSense if you use env dot.
okay, I gotcha. And in terms of like I know Turbo Pack's out now. I think it's all the tests are I don't know if it's like officially been
We are
branded to use.
Yeah,
Okay, you are okay.
are we turbo yet.com, I believe is the thing, says
Yeah,
we
yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
100% turbo. So we turbo pack, they have not really opened up a plugin system at all yet.
Yeah.
So you can still use this to load all of the env files, like and apply validation and all of that, but you can't do
Okay.
this. You can't do this import env from varlock.env and get the sort of type safe validated or coerced values, and
Okay.
we can't support the security features just yet,
Yeah.
not until they create some kind of plugin system for TurboPack.
Yeah. I remember when it came out though, because like Tobias, who did Webpack, is working on it heavily now. But like I think I remember when they first started talking about it that it was supposed to be Webpack plugin compatible. I don't know if that is actually the case or is going to
Yeah,
be the case, but
there's a list of ones that are compatible, but it's
you
not a
you can
comprehensive list, I think.
you can swap in loaders, I believe is the thing. So you can
okay.
say, for this kind of file, use this Webpack loader, and I think it will work. But you can't do some of the other things around, hooking into the different sort of Webpack
Yeah.
life cycle events and all of that, which is what we use at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. But they'll probably,
Plugin system, like,
yeah.
yeah, they'll have to. So and I'll keep playing around, see if I can figure out something. I just found out about the sort of loader compatibility pretty recently, so I might be able to make something work. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah, no, just generally curious. Like it's literally brand new, like
Yeah.
so,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you're not the only company looking to tap into there probably. So,
For
so
sure.
I imagine something will come out of there. But no, that's cool. And so like right now, the product is like you said, it's built with TypeScript, so Node. Um, is is the product right now where it's at? Like you said, it can support other languages, but right now you're focused on like Node, like Bun, Dino. Well, basically all the flavors, Cloudflare workers, whatever there is. I'm sure there's some other one I heard about a few months ago, but anyways, but it's kind of like focus on the server side JavaScript ecosystem for the moment, for the most part.
I mean, not totally. Like we definitely want the developer experience with JavaScript to be excellent. I wouldn't say server
Yeah.
side only. Like I'm making a integration right now. We have this next integration, and definitely this sort of like
Okay.
hybrid, framework kind of stuff. We
Yeah.
want that to be really good. I feel like it's especially important when you're doing this kind of hybrid rendering to like,
Hmm.
add these extra guardrails to make sure you don't leak stuff and know how to handle sensitive things properly.
Yeah.
But one of the big goals with the move from Domino to Varlock is making this more, feel more at home in other languages. So,
Okay.
you can install it via Homebrew, you can install it via curl. There's a standalone binary. You can run varlock run, and then your command, and it will load everything and inject it as environment variables. So that'll work
Okay.
with any language.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Long term, we'll add the type generation for other languages, and we'll probably end up with like similar helper libraries in other languages so that you get that, the type safe and, IntelliSense kind of stuff loaded.
Yeah. No, that's cool. It's making me think of, I don't know if you ever heard of mitosis from the people at Builder. It's more for, they parse an AST, but it's like really like you write a React component, it can
Yeah,
generate
I
a Vue
remember that
component.
one.
It's not the same thing you're doing, obviously, but like I feel like you could, well, you kind of have your own mitosis to some degree for the config, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we
But
just
yeah.
want this to be like, why, whatever you're starting a project, like rather than trying to figure out, okay, which library do I want to use, which do I want to use for validation, how am I going to wire this up? Like, we just want this to
Yeah.
be like the standard. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel that different than an example file, only you get all the validation and everything for free.
And you can,
Yeah.
I mean, there's VS Code plugins and OpenVSX plugins, for
Okay.
VS Code fork people like Theo. So like you could even just install that and get benefits from decent
Okay, yeah.
syntax highlighting in the file itself, right?
Yeah, so this
Okay.
is getting
Nice.
highlighted by our plugin. If you switch it to just end, yeah, everything is now just comment, right? You don't have
Okay.
any
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was
highlight.
Windsurf kicking in with suggestions or if it was a language server or
Yeah, our plugin will also give you a little bit of IntelliSense here about what the different decorators do.
okay.
And yeah, we're going to expand that, so give you more auto completion and all that stuff too.
Yeah, and like you and Phil were saying, with the standalone binary, it still can work fine. So like, doesn't matter. Like, I don't know what the binary is built in. I'm assuming Node, maybe not, but like, it doesn't matter. Like, you can put it into, like, I'm doing a Rails app and I load this up and it still just work fine as long as you can run the binary, obviously. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's cool, man.
Yeah, I mean, so I can tell you one thing about sort of what we're working on next, which I think is pretty fun. One of the problems that we see a lot is everybody's using these AI code assistants, and they have, their API keys sitting in their .env file in plain text,
Yeah.
and these AI tools are like sending those files back home to,
Oh yeah, that's true. It's true. Or
and most
potentially.
people
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
even realize it. And there's been a lot of people complaining. They've done some work to make sure it ignores those files, but whatever. You got a lot of tools scanning a lot of your code, and anything that's sitting in plain text, I think, is at risk. And so
yeah.
one of the things that we're working on is a way to make sure that that stuff sitting in your local files, even if they're get ignored, will be encrypted.
Hmm.
So like
Okay.
rather than, say I've got my, .env.local file. Here we go. See if I can type. Oops.
2 dots.
Yeah. There's always pressure typing when you're on a live stream.
So like rather than my secret key, whatever, right? So basically,
Yeah.
this could be some encrypted thing, right?
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
we have a Mac app that uses biometric unlock and the secure enclave. So
Okay.
to do encryption like in the secure enclave, secured by your fingerprint, so like you never actually have access to the key that decrypts it, and every time
Okay.
you go to load, similar to the 1Password experience, you get a pop-up, you scan your finger, it stays unlocked
Yeah.
for a certain amount of time. so that, you know, we just take that problem totally out of the equation. No, nothing can leak if it's not in plain text, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I had just a couple more questions. Like you're talking before, like, hey, like we can have a function, it pulls it in from like AWS, or you mentioned one password. So you've created those integrations. Is there is the plugin system kind of open? Like, I don't know, like let's just say I started to use it and then I don't know, like I'm using Zig or something, and I'm hosting it like I don't know, Hetzner or whatever, you know, and then I'm like, I need a plugin so I can call a varlock function to pull in my thing. Is it extensible in that way, or is it closed, or
So right now it's just anything that's a CLI you can use. So it's literally
okay,
just calling. I think Theo's calling like exec sync, right? Like,
Yeah, so basically it would be like this, like OP item equals, right now it looks like this, exec, and then, you know, the one password CLI is OP, I think it's
oh, okay, okay, gotcha,
read,
okay,
and then whatever, it's like OP, yeah, whatever. It's approximately like that, right?
okay, okay,
And you can imagine swapping this for different CLIs that pull from different places.
okay,
This
gotcha.
works. It's pretty flexible, but it's not going to be quite as fast because it's reading everything one at a time, and you know you need to make sure you
Hmm.
go and install that CLI on the machine. Um, Coming up shortly, like, and we sort of had this in Domino, so we're going to sort of port this over. You'd be able to do something like you know, register plugin, and then this might be like an npm thing. So like npm varlock one password
Okay,
plugin,
gotcha.
and then this would introduce new data types potentially and new functions. So now I could do something like op item equals op, you know.
Okay, gotcha. And then you're not
Yeah.
loading it every time, and
So,
it's
and then
it's
that plugin would be able to say, okay, go and resolve everything, gather up all of the things I need to fetch from one password, you know, make a bulk fetch to get them all at once. And you can imagine just introducing plugins for every place that somebody might want to have secrets.
okay, gotcha, gotcha. No, that's super cool. Uh, so it's, you know, it's got flexibility built into it. You get your type safety, and hopefully it's preventing AI from slurping up your secrets too.
Yeah.
hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, the idea here is it's flexible, right? Not everyone wants to put their stuff in one password. Not everybody wants to put them in whatever AWS Secrets Manager. So like, if you just want to use it for validation, great. If you want to use it for validation and have encrypted stuff locally, great. If you want to pull everything
Yeah,
from one password, great. Like, we just want it to work with everything really, and without you having to write all that custom glue code to make it happen.
yeah. No, that's cool. And I know we're almost at time there, so this is actually kind of it's a nice way of you to kind of like, I guess, wrap it up in that sense. It's been super cool checking this all out. Why is my screen not changing? There we go. So if folks want, like, I'll drop a link to Varlock again here, and there's also, I guess, if people want to start using the project, obviously they can go to varlock.dev. Do you like I don't know if you have a Discord or anything, or like
We do. Yep.
discussions. Okay, cool. And that's all on the varlock.dev.
Yep. There's a link in the header.
Okay, cool.
Yep. There's a
Nice.
Discord. There's the GitHub repo for Varlock. There's like a RFC that we'd love people to comment on that talks about, you know, this end spec, the decorator syntax, and all of that. You know,
Okay.
we'd like it to become a standard if possible. You know, you can imagine
Yeah.
every public Docker container, you know, rather than having this stuff buried in a README, you could just have a schema file built in.
Yeah.
If you boot it up and something's missing, it yells at you. Like there's a lot of potential there. So yeah, we'd
Yeah.
love to collaborate. Please come chat with us.
Cool. Yeah, I know. I was gonna ask if you were looking to standardize it, because I know they've done that with other things. So, but that's super cool. And yeah, so thanks again, guys, for hanging out. I'm sure you're both quite busy, so definitely appreciate you taking the time to hang. And it was good meeting today, Theo and Phil. It's good to see you again, even though it's virtual this time.
Yeah.
But yeah, if either you're in Montreal at some point, hit me up and take you out for a beer or something. And
Awesome.
cool.
Sounds great.
All right. Well,
Thanks so
thanks
much
for
for having
tuning in,
me.
everybody. Oh yeah, no problem. And if you both don't mind just staying on for one sec,
Sure.
everybody else, we will see you in the next one. I'm traveling a bit, so I think it's August we'll be back. But yeah, take care, everybody.